Captain Elias Carter leaned back in his chair, staring at the glowing message on his screen. The words were clear, yet unbelievable. You are invited to the Vakish royal court. The princess seeks a mate. No one may see her face before the union. Do you accept? Elias had traveled to many planets, met strange creatures, and seen wonders beyond imagination. But this? A secretive alien princess looking for a mate. And no one had seen her face. It sounded like a trap. Or worse, some kind of cruel joke. His crewmates, standing behind him, were just as puzzled. This is insane, muttered Jackson, his chief engineer. Why would they invite a human? And why is her face hidden? Maybe she has giant fangs or something. Or maybe, said Mira, the ship's doctor, she's cursed. Some species believe that revealing their true form can bring bad luck. Elias kept reading the message. The Vakish were a powerful and mysterious race. They rarely interacted with outsiders, and their traditions were strict. If their princess had to find a mate, it was a big deal. But why him? Then he saw the last line. Only the bravest may answer this call. Elias smirked. He had never been one to back away from a challenge. I'll do it, he said, standing up. His crew gasped. Captain, think about this. Mira protested. You don't know what you're walking into. That's what makes it exciting, Elias said, grabbing his jacket. Besides, if everyone else is too scared, that means someone has to take the first step. Before anyone could stop him, he pressed ACCPT on the screen. The journey to the Vakish homeworld took 3 days. As Elias's ship approached, he saw a planet covered in shimmering golden forests and glowing blue rivers. The sight was breathtaking, like something out of a dream. A sleek, black Vakish transport ship guided him down to the surface. The moment he stepped out, he felt the air, cool, crisp, and filled with a strange energy. Waiting for him was a group of tall, robed figures. Their faces were hidden beneath smooth silver masks. The leader stepped forward and spoke in a calm, deep voice. Human, you are the only outsider to accept the challenge. Follow us. Elias nodded, keeping his posture relaxed but alert. The Vakish led him through massive golden gates into a palace unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls shimmered as if made of liquid light, and strange floating orbs hovered in the air, casting a soft glow. In the center of the grand hall stood a throne made of twisting crystal, and seated upon it, hidden behind a veil of shimmering blue energy, was her Princess Syra. Though he could not see her face, Elias could feel her presence. Strong, silent, watching him. The Vakish nobles stood in a circle around them. The leader raised his hand. You have come to answer the call, he said. But before you may stand beside our princess, you must prove yourself worthy. Elias crossed his arms. And how do I do that? There are 3 trials, the leader declared. Each will test a part of who you are. Your wisdom, your resilience, and your heart. Only if you pass will you stand before the princess and decide your fate. Elias glanced at the shimmering veil, his curiosity growing. He had no idea what the princess looked like. No one did. And yet something in his gut told him this was more than just a test. It was a story waiting to be told, and he was ready to write it. Elias Carter stood in the grand hall of the Vakish palace, surrounded by tall, masked figures. Their glowing eyes watched him closely, waiting to see if he was truly worthy. In front of him, hidden behind a shimmering blue veil, sat Princess Syra. He could not see her face, but he could feel her presence, calm yet powerful. The royal advisor, dressed in dark robes, stepped forward. His voice was smooth but firm. The first trial will test your wisdom. Are you ready, human? Elias nodded. Let's do this. The advisor clapped his hands, and the floor beneath them shifted. A circular platform rose from the ground, covered in strange symbols and glowing lines. In the center of the platform stood a massive cube made of crystal, It floated slightly above the surface, humming softly. "This is the puzzle of truth," the advisor said. "It has remained unsolved for over 100 years. Only a mind with true understanding can unlock its secret." Elias studied the cube. The symbols on its surface moved and changed, forming patterns that disappeared before he could fully process them. "Great," he muttered. "An ancient alien Rubik's Cube." The nobles whispered among themselves. They expected him to fail. Other warriors, scholars, and even kings had tried before him. All had failed. Princess Lyra said nothing, but Elias could feel her watching. He took a deep breath. Instead of trying to force a solution, he let his instincts take over. He touched the cube, feeling the energy flowing through it. The symbols weren't random. They'd followed a pattern, like the stars aligning in a cosmic dance. He remembered something his grandfather once told him. The answer is always there. You just have to look at it the right way. Slowly, Elias turned the cube in his hands, aligning the symbols based on the movement of the glowing lines. The humming grew louder. A pulse of energy ran through his fingertips. Then, click. The cube split apart, revealing a small golden sphere inside. The hall fell silent. The advisor's eyes widened. Impossible. Elias smirked and held up the sphere. "I guess I got lucky." The nobles murmured, impressed but cautious. The advisor hesitated, then bowed slightly. "You have passed the first trial." Elias placed the sphere back and stepped away. He glanced toward Princess Syra. For the first time, she spoke. "You do not fear the unknown." Her voice was soft but carried an undeniable strength. Elias shrugged. "Fear is just curiosity waiting to be understood." For a brief moment, the shimmering veil flickered. He could almost see a silhouette behind it. Then it returned to its normal state. The advisor straightened. "The second trial begins now." Elias turned as the floor shifted again. The walls of the palace melted away, replaced by a vast open field under a dark sky. A strange energy filled the air. This was no ordinary place. "Your next challenge is survival," the advisor announced. "You must withstand the storm of shadows." Before Elias could ask what that meant, the wind howled. Dark clouds swirled above, crackling with blue lightning. The ground trembled. Then the storm arrived. A powerful force slammed into Elias, pushing him back. Shadows rose from the ground, twisting and shifting like living creatures. They surrounded him, whispering strange words in a language he couldn't understand. The air grew cold. His vision blurred. He had faced danger before: pirates, hostile planets, deadly creatures. But this was different. This storm wasn't just about physical strength. It was testing his willpower. The whispers grew louder, creeping into his mind. "Turn back. Leave. You do not belong here." Elias gritted his teeth. "Nice try." He took a step forward. The shadows closed in, trying to stop him. He pushed harder, forcing his way through. Every step felt heavier, as if he was walking through deep water. In the distance, he saw a faint light. A path. "Keep moving." His body ached. His mind screamed at him to stop, but he refused to give up. He wasn't just doing this for himself anymore. He was proving something to the Vakesh, to the princess, and maybe even to the universe itself. With one final step, he reached the light. The storm vanished. The sky cleared. He was back in the palace. The nobles stared in shock. No outsider had ever lasted this long, let alone reached the end of the trial. The advisor hesitated, then bowed again. "You have passed the second trial." Elias took a deep breath and looked toward the princess. She was silent, but he could feel something different in her presence. A sense of curiosity. She spoke again. Most would have run. "Why did you keep going?" Elias wiped the sweat from his forehead and grinned. "Because I'm not most people." For a moment, the veil flickered again. The advisor stepped forward. The final trial remains. The test of heart. Asterisk, 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 rest for now. Human. Tomorrow, you will face your greatest challenge. Elias nodded but kept his eyes on the princess. He had passed the first 2 trials. But something told him the hardest part was yet to come. And deep down, he wasn't afraid. He was excited. Elias Carter sat in his chamber, staring at the alien sky through the window. The stars above the Vakesh homeworld twinkled like scattered diamonds, but his mind wasn't on their beauty. His thoughts were on the final trial, the most important test of all. He had solved the puzzle of truth. He had endured the storm of shadows. But this next trial wasn't about strength or intelligence. It was about something deeper. The test of heart. Elias had no idea what to expect, and that made it all the more exciting. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, a Vakesh attendant stood outside, dressed in flowing blue robes. "It is time," the attendant said. Elias nodded and followed. The grand hall looked different this time. The floating orbs of light were dim, casting long shadows across the floor. The nobles stood in complete silence, their masked faces unreadable. At the far end of the hall, behind the shimmering veil, sat Princess Syra. The royal advisor stepped forward. His voice echoed in the stillness. "The final trial is the most difficult of all. It is not a test of skill or survival. It is a test of truth." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Truth about what?" "About yourself." The advisor gestured, and the floor beneath Elias shifted. A smooth, reflective surface appeared, like liquid glass. When Elias looked down, he saw his own reflection staring back at him. Then something strange happened. His reflection changed. At first, it was subtle. The color of his eyes flickered. His expression shifted. Then, the changes became more drastic. The reflection showed a different version of him, one that looked uncertain, hesitant, even lost. And then it spoke. "Why are you really here?" Elias stiffened. "I came to face the challenge." His reflection smirked. "Did you? Or did you come for glory? To prove something? To be the human who dared where others ran?" Elias frowned. This wasn't what he expected. He thought he would be fighting a monster, solving a riddle, or facing some kind of ancient magic. But this was himself. "What if she is not what you expect?" The reflection continued. "What if she is not beautiful to your eyes? Will you still choose her?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He glanced at the shimmering veil, where Princess Syra sat in silence. He had never seen her face. He didn't know what she looked like. But then again, did it matter? He wasn't here because of her appearance. He was here because he wanted to know her. He wanted to understand her world, her thoughts, her heart. Elias turned back to the reflection and smiled. "It doesn't matter what I expect. What matters is who she is." The reflection stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, it nodded. The surface of the floor rippled, and the reflection faded away. The hall was silent. Then the advisor spoke. "You have passed the test of heart." The nobles whispered among themselves, clearly surprised. No outsider had ever made it this far. Elias looked toward Princess Syra. For a long moment, she did not move. Then, for the first time since he had arrived, she stood up. The shimmering veil around her flickered. Then it disappeared. The entire court held its breath. For the first time, Elias saw her. Princess Syra was unlike any being he had ever met. Her skin shimmered with shifting colors, like liquid metal reflecting starlight. Bioluminescent patterns glowed faintly along her arms and neck, pulsing like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Her eyes were vast and deep, like galaxies swirling in the night. She was beautiful, but not in the way humans define beauty. She was beautiful in a way that belonged to the universe itself. Elias met her gaze and smiled. "You are." He paused, searching for the right word. "Incredible." A wave of shock passed through the nobles. No one had expected this reaction. They had prepared for disgust, hesitation, or fear. But not this. Zaira took a slow step forward. "You, do not turn away." "Why would I?" Elias said, his voice gentle. "You are more than what you look like, and I want to know all of you." For the first time, Zaira's expression softened. She had lived her whole life behind a veil, hiding from judgment, from rejection. And yet, here stood a human, an outsider, who saw her not as a mystery, not as a challenge, but simply as her. The advisor cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "The trials are complete. Elias Carter, do you accept the princess as your chosen bondmate?" Elias looked at Zaira, his decision already made. He had come here for adventure, for challenge. But he had found something more. "I do." A soft glow surrounded Zaira, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing brighter. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his. It was warm, gentle, real. For the first time in her life, she was truly seen. And for the first time, Elias knew this was just the beginning. The grand hall of the Vakish palace was silent. Every noble, every advisor, every warrior in attendance stood still, staring in disbelief. A human had passed all 3 trials. And now, Princess Zaira, who had spent her entire life behind a veil, stood before him, her bioluminescent skin glowing softly in the dim light. She had asked the question, would he accept her? And Elias Carter had answered without hesitation, "I do." The words echoed through the chamber, breaking centuries of tradition. Zaira's luminous patterns pulsed slightly, as if reacting to something deep within her. No one had ever chosen her like this. Not out of duty, not out of fear, but because they wanted to. But the moment was short-lived. A low murmur spread among the nobles. Then, a deep, stern voice interrupted the silence. "This cannot be allowed." Elias turned to see a tall Vakish noble stepping forward. His silver mask gleamed in the soft light. His robes were lined with golden threads, marking him as someone of high rank. The advisor bowed slightly. "Lord Varric speaks." Elias crossed his arms. He could already tell this guy wasn't happy. Varric's glowing eyes narrowed. "You are an outsider. You do not belong in our royal bloodline." Elias smirked. "Funny. Your princess seems to think differently." The nobles gasped at his boldness. Zaira herself remained silent, but her gaze stayed fixed on Elias. Varric's expression darkened. "A human does not understand our ways. This bond cannot happen." Elias took a step closer. "I passed your trials. Fair and square." Varric's voice grew cold. "The trials test skill. They do not decide our future." The tension in the room thickened. Elias could feel the weight of dozens of glowing eyes watching him, waiting to see what he would do. He turned to Zaira. "Is this true? Do they get to decide for you?" Zaira's patterns dimmed slightly. "No," she said softly. "I have the right to choose." Varric's jaw tightened. "Then choose wisely." The nobles waited. Even the royal advisor seemed unsure of what would happen next. Finally, Zaira stepped forward. Her eyes met Elias'. "I choose him." A stunned silence followed. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He had won battles, fought enemies, and explored dangerous worlds. But somehow, this moment, this decision, felt like the most important one of his life. Varric, however, was not impressed. His voice was sharp, his anger barely contained. "If you stand by this choice, then he must face one final test." Elias sighed. "Of course. Another test. Why not?" The advisor looked uneasy. "This test is different. It is not of mind, nor body, nor heart." Zaira's patterns dimmed even more. "It is a test of trust." Elias frowned. "What does that mean?" The advisor hesitated, then stepped forward. "You must drink from the chalice of souls." Elias raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dramatic." A robed attendant stepped forward. carrying a small crystal chalice filled with a shimmering blue liquid. The substance inside swirled like living light, shifting colors as if it held the very essence of the universe. The advisor explained, "This is an ancient ritual. If you are truly worthy, the chalice will accept you. If not," he paused, "you will not survive." Elias's smirk faded. "Oh, that kind of test." Zyra took a step closer. "You do not have to do this." He met her gaze. "But if I don't, they'll never accept me." She didn't answer, but he could see the concern in her glowing eyes. Elias turned back to the chalice. The liquid inside pulsed, almost as if it was alive. The air around it hummed with an energy he couldn't quite explain. He had a choice. Walk away, go back to his ship, leave this strange, beautiful world behind, or risk everything for something greater. Elias took the chalice. A murmur of surprise ran through the nobles. Even Varric seemed momentarily taken aback. Elias lifted the chalice, staring at the swirling liquid. He had faced death before. This wasn't the first time he was stepping into the unknown. Without another word, he drank. The effect was instant. A wave of heat surged through his body. His vision blurred. The entire hall seemed to shift and ripple, as if the walls were melting into light. Suddenly, he wasn't in the palace anymore. He was standing in the middle of a vast cosmic expanse. Stars and galaxies swirled around him. Energy pulsed beneath his feet. Then he heard a voice. Not a single voice, but many. Soft, whispering, echoing through space. "Who are you?" Elias steadied himself. "Elias Carter. What do you seek?" He took a deep breath, understanding. The voices shifted, their tone unreadable. "What do you fear?" Elias hesitated. He had faced danger all his life. He had stood against impossible odds. But now, deep in his heart, he realized the truth. "I fear." His voice was quiet. "Being alone." The whispers stopped. The cosmic energy around him pulsed once. Then, silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stars exploded in light. The advisor took a step forward, eyes wide. "The chalice accepted you." Zyra let out a breath of relief. A faint smile touched her lips. Varric, however, remained silent. He had no more arguments, no more reasons to oppose. Elias turned to Zyra. "So, do I pass?" She smiled. "You do." And for the first time, the entire court bowed in respect. Elias Carter had not only passed the trials, he had earned his place among the Vakesh, and perhaps in the heart of their princess as well. The grand hall of the Vakesh palace was filled with stunned silence. Every noble, every advisor, every warrior stood frozen in place, their glowing eyes locked on the human who had done the impossible. Elias Carter had passed the final test. He had drunk from the chalice of souls, an ancient ritual designed to reject the unworthy. But the chalice had accepted him. He was still standing, his breathing heavy, his heart pounding, but he was alive. And that changed everything. The advisor stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "The chalice has spoken." He turned to the nobles. "Elias Carter is worthy." A murmur spread through the court. Some nobles nodded in reluctant agreement. Others remained skeptical. And then there was Lord Varric, who clenched his fists but said nothing. Elias turned to Princess Zyra. She was watching him with something new in her eyes, something soft, something warm. He smiled. "Guess I'm not going anywhere." Zyra's glowing patterns pulsed faintly, as if responding to his words. It seemed so. The moment was interrupted by the royal advisor. "There is one final step." Elias sighed. "Of course, there's always something else." The advisor ignored his sarcasm. "The bond ceremony." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Bond ceremony." Zyra took a step closer. "A ritual that will formally unite us. If we complete it, our connection will be sealed, recognized by the entire Vakish people. Elias nodded slowly. And if we don't? Varric spoke for the first time. Then all your trials will mean nothing. You will leave this world and never return. The room fell silent. Elias studied Cyrus' face. She had spent her life behind a veil, unseen and unchosen. Now, for the first time, she had a choice. And so did he. He took a deep breath. Let's do it. The bond ceremony. Elias followed Syra through the palace, past towering crystal pillars and glowing pathways. They walked in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Finally, they arrived at a vast chamber. The ceiling opened to the night sky, revealing thousands of stars. In the center of the room stood a large glowing pool. Its waters shimmered with energy, shifting between colors Elias had never seen before. Syra turned to him. Once we step into the pool, our thoughts, our emotions, everything will be shared for a moment. Elias frowned. You mean, like, mind reading? Syra shook her head. More than that. It will reveal who we truly are, without masks, without lies. Elias hesitated. He had faced monsters, storms, and even the depths of his own mind during the trials. But this, letting someone see everything inside him, that was terrifying in a whole new way. Syra seemed to sense his hesitation. You do not have to do this. Elias looked into her glowing eyes. He had come this far. He wasn't about to turn back now. He smirked. Too late for second thoughts, princess. Syra gave a small, almost shy smile. Then, together, they stepped into the pool. The moment their feet touched the water, everything changed. A surge of warmth flowed through Elias, wrapping around him like a gentle current. He felt weightless, as if he were floating between time and space. And then, he saw memories that weren't his. A young Tyra, standing alone as others whispered about her hidden face. A lonely childhood, filled with silent halls and empty rooms. The pain of rejection, time and time again. And then, hope, the day she heard of a human challenger. The day she saw Elias for the first time. The way he spoke without fear, without judgment. She had never felt truly seen. Not until him. Elias's heart ached. He had thought he was the one proving himself, but Syra had been fighting a battle of her own long before he arrived. Then the memories shifted. His own past played before his eyes. A boy staring at the stars, dreaming of adventure. A young man, always searching, never staying in one place for long. The emptiness of never belonging anywhere. And then, Syra. The challenge had drawn him in, but it was her, who made him stay. As the memories faded, Elias gasped, his body trembling. He looked at Tyra, and she looked at him. No words were needed. They understood each other now, completely. The pool glowed brighter, and a soft energy wrapped around them. The ceremony was complete. They were bonded. A new beginning. Elias and Syra stepped out of the pool, their hands still touching. The nobles, the advisors, even Varric watched in silence. The advisors spoke first. The bond is sealed. He bowed deeply. Elias Carter is now part of the royal house of Vakesh. A mixture of shock and acceptance rippled through the court. Even those who doubted Elias before could not deny what had just happened. Varric, however, remained still. His glowing eyes locked on Elias. This changes everything. Elias met his gaze. Yeah, it does. Varric said nothing more, but Elias knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Syra turned to Elias, her voice soft. Are you ready for what comes next? Elias grinned. With you. Always. For the first time. Syra laughed, a sound like distant chimes in the wind. Together, they stepped forward. Toward an unknown future. Toward something neither of them had expected. Toward a destiny written in the stars. Elias Carter stood beside Princess Syra, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. The bond ceremony had sealed his place in Vakesh history. He was no longer just an outsider. He was part of their royal bloodline now. But not everyone was happy about it. Lord Varric's glowing eyes burned with silent fury as he stepped forward. "This cannot be accepted so easily," he said, his voice cold. "Tradition does not change overnight." Elias crossed his arms. "Funny, I thought the bond ceremony was a sacred tradition." A murmur spread through the court. Varric's jaw tightened. "The ceremony is undeniable, but the trust of the people, that is something you have yet to earn." Zedera stepped in front of Elias, her glowing skin pulsing with determination. "Elias has proven himself again and again. He has passed every trial. The chalice accepted him. The bond is formed. What more do you demand?" Varric's voice was calm, but his words were sharp. "Actions prove more than rituals." He turned to the court. "We have enemies. The Krezak raiders grow bolder. The human has shown skill. But does he have loyalty? Will he fight for us?" Elias sighed. "You want me to prove myself. Again." Varric stepped closer. "The Krezak are attacking a border colony as we speak. If you truly belong here, then stand with us. Defend your new people." Silence filled the hall. Elias looked at Tyra. He didn't need the bond to understand the concern in her eyes. But she didn't stop him. She knew this was his choice. Elias smirked. "Well, I was getting bored anyway. Let's go save a colony." The battle for Vakesh. The journey to the border colony was fast, but not fast enough. When Elias stepped off the royal transport, he saw smoke rising in the distance. The Krezak had already landed. The Vakesh warriors stood ready, their glowing armor reflecting the sky's twin moons. Thyra stood among them, her presence a symbol of hope. Elias tightened his grip on his plasma rifle. A scout rushed to them. "The Krezak outnumber us. They have taken the central tower. If they activate the beacon, they will call for reinforcements." Elias glanced at Tyra. "That sounds bad." She nodded. "Very bad." Elias grinned. "Then let's make sure that doesn't happen." The plan. Varric, despite his doubts, was a skilled commander. He divided the forces into 3 groups. One would hold the front line, another would flank from the side, and Elias. Elias had the hardest job. "You will go through the ruins and take out the beacon," Varric ordered. "If you fail, we lose." Elias smirked. No pressure. Zedera stepped closer, concern in her glowing eyes. "Be careful." Elias winked. "Always." And then the battle began. Into the fire. Elias moved through the ruins, his rifle ready. The Krezak were reptilian warriors, towering and armored, their weapons crackling with red energy. He took cover behind a broken wall, counting 3 guards near the beacon tower. "All right, let's do this the smart way," he muttered. Then he rolled out and started shooting. His plasma shots hit 2 Krezak before they could react. The third lunged at him, but Elias ducked, firing point blank. The enemy fell, and Elias sprinted toward the tower. Inside, alarms blared. More Krezak were waiting. "You guys really don't make this easy," he muttered, dodging a blast and returning fire. He fought his way up the tower, adrenaline rushing through his veins. Finally, he reached the control room. The beacon was already charging. Elias cursed. He had seconds to stop it. He ran to the console, fingers flying over alien symbols. Come on. A deep growl made him freeze. He turned. A massive Krezak warrior stood at the doorway, a heavy axe glowing in its grip. Elias sighed. Of course, there's a boss fight. The last stand. The Krezak charged. Elias dodged, but the axe grazed his shoulder, sending pain through his arm. He rolled, grabbing a fallen energy blade from the ground. The warrior swung again. Elias blocked, sparks flying as the weapons clashed. He gritted his teeth, muscles straining. Then he saw his opening. With a quick spin, he drove the energy blade into the Krezak's side. The warrior roared before collapsing. Elias didn't waste time. He turned back to the beacon. 10 seconds left. He yanked out the main power crystal. The beacon flickered, then died. Outside, the battlefield went silent. The Krezak forces hesitated, their reinforcements lost. The Vakesh warriors seized the moment, pushing them back. By the time Elias stumbled out of the tower, the battle was over. Zyra ran to him. "You did it." Elias smirked, despite his exhaustion. "Told you. No pressure. A new trust." Back at the palace, the nobles gathered once more. Varric, though clearly reluctant, stepped forward. "Elias Carter, today you defended Vakesh. You fought not for yourself, but for our people. I can no longer doubt your place among us." Elias raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? A few nobles chuckled. Even Varric's lips twitched slightly. Zyra stepped beside Elias, her glowing hand resting on his. "Elias is one of us now." The court, once skeptical, now bowed in respect. Elias let out a breath. He had come here as an outsider, but now he had a home, and perhaps something even more. The grand hall of the Vakesh palace had never been so alive. The nobles, once divided in their opinions, now stood united. Warriors, advisors, and even the common people had gathered outside, waiting to see the human who had proven himself time and time again. Elias Carter stood beside Princess Zyra, feeling the weight of his journey settle on his shoulders. He had come to this world as an outsider, faced impossible challenges, and now he stood before the Vakesh people as one of their own. Lord Varric stepped forward. "Elias Carter, by bond and by battle, you have earned your place among us. Today we recognize you as a defender of Vakesh." A deep hum filled the hall as the nobles struck their staffs against the ground, a sign of respect. Elias had finally done it. Zyra turned to him, her glowing skin pulsing softly. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Elias smirked. "I've come this far. No turning back now." But as the celebrations continued, a shadow of doubt loomed in the air. The Krezak raiders had been defeated, but for how long? And what of the rest of the galaxy? Elias had a feeling his journey wasn't over just yet. The unexpected message. The night sky over the palace was breathtaking, twin moons casting a silver glow over the city. Elias stood on the balcony, watching the stars. Zyra joined him, her presence calm yet full of unspoken thoughts. "You seem distant." Elias sighed. "I was just thinking. What happens now? I mean, I bonded with a princess, fought off space raiders, and somehow ended up in a royal court. Not exactly the life I planned." Zyra's glowing eyes studied him. "Do you regret it?" Elias chuckled. "Not even a little." Before Zyra could respond, a Vakesh guard approached, holding a glowing datapad. "Princess, we've received a message. It's urgent." Zyra took the pad, her face growing serious as she read. "It's from the Galactic Council. They request an audience. Immediately." Elias raised an eyebrow. "The Galactic Council. Why do I feel like that's bad news?" Zyra's expression was unreadable. "Because it might be. The Council's warning." The next morning, Elias and Zyra stood before a large holographic display in the royal chamber. The faces of multiple alien leaders appeared, representing different civilizations across the galaxy. A tall bird-like diplomat from the Avexian race spoke first. "Vakesh leaders, we acknowledge the bravery of your people, but we must address a concern." Zyra remained calm. "What concern?" A reptilian council member narrowed his eyes. "The human." His gaze fell on Elias. "His presence among your people is unusual and dangerous." Elias crossed his arms. "Oh great, another speech about how I don't belong." A feline-like ambassador interrupted. "No, it's not about you personally. It's about what your presence means." Zyra frowned. Explain. The Avexian diplomat sighed. The Krezak are not the only threat. There are factions in the galaxy who see humans as unpredictable. Your decision to bond with one has drawn attention. Elias glanced at Syra. So, let me guess. There are people out there who don't like the idea of a human being part of an alien royal family. The reptilian nodded. More than that. Some see it as a reason for war. Silence filled the chamber. Elias let out a breath. You've got to be kidding me. Syra's glowing skin pulsed slightly, a sign of deep thought. We will not turn away from our choice. The council members exchanged glances. The Avexian spoke again. Then be prepared, princess. The galaxy is watching. With that, the holograms faded. A choice to make. Elias leaned against a pillar, rubbing his temples. So let me get this straight. Because I stayed, I might have just put a target on this entire planet. Syra stepped beside him. This was never just about you, Elias. The galaxy fears change. Elias sighed. And what do we do now? Zyra's glowing hand rested on his. We do what we've always done. We stand together. Elias looked at her, feeling something shift in his chest. He had spent his life searching for a place to belong. Now he had found one. But with it came new challenges, new dangers. And yet, standing beside Syra, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't running. Not this time. A new journey begins. That evening, as the city lights flickered under the night sky, Elias made his decision. He turned to Syra, a grin forming on his face. If the galaxy wants to watch us, then let's give them something worth watching. Syra's glowing patterns pulsed warmly. You really are fearless. Elias smirked. Not fearless, just stubborn. The future was uncertain. Enemies were waiting. But Elias had faced impossible odds before, and he wasn't about to stop now. Because now, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for his home, his people, his princess, and no force in the galaxy was going to take that away from him.